They sold all Chinese girls at auction. Only one was left, until a widower rancher offered his name. The small town of Red Willow was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. People went about their lives tending to farms, trading goods, and helping one another when needed. But that week, something strange and unsettling had taken over the town. The old wooden auction house, usually quiet and dusty, was alive with noise and movement. Word had spread that Chinese girls, brought from faraway lands, were being sold at auction. It was not something the townspeople had seen before, and it caused a mix of curiosity, worry, and excitement. Families crowded into the hall, talking in hushed voices, while some men who traveled the frontier saw it as a chance to acquire young girls for work, companionship, or other reasons. It was a sight that would make anyone feel uneasy, especially because most of the girls had already been sold. Only one remained, and that girl's story had yet to be told. May, the last girl at the auction, sat quietly near the corner of the hall. She had traveled far, brought from a distant town across the ocean, and everything she had known was now gone. Her family, her home, even her language felt like a memory fading into mist.
She clutched a small bundle of belongings close to her chest, a few pieces of clothing, a worn-out doll, and a tiny wooden comb that had been her mother's.
Her dark eyes moved slowly across the crowded room, noticing the eager faces of bidders, the auctioneer calling out names and numbers, and the stacks of chairs that seemed to surround her like a cage. May did not understand why she was there or what would happen next, but she knew that the world she had known was gone, and only uncertainty waited ahead. The townspeople whispered among themselves. "Who will buy her?" one man asked, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "She's quiet, may be useful for work on a farm," another suggested. Some women shook their heads, feeling sorry for the girl, while others looked with a kind of fascination that made May shrink back into herself. She could sense that no one was really thinking of her feelings, only what they could gain or how she might fit into their lives. Her heart pounded as the auctioneer stepped forward, hammer in hand, ready to begin the final sale. The air was thick with dust, tension, and the murmurs of people imagining the girl's future without considering what she wanted. May took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had learned, from whispers and glimpses of others' reactions, that she had no choice. She could only hope someone would be kind, someone who might see her not as a commodity, but as a human being with feelings, dreams, and memories of a life that had been taken from her. Outside, the wind blew across the town, rattling windows and stirring the dust in the streets. It was a hot day, the kind where sweat ran down the backs of people working under the sun. Inside the auction house, it felt even hotter because of the crowded bodies and the nervous energy in the room. May tried to calm herself by looking at the small bundle in her hands, imagining that it was a shield protecting her from everything happening around her. She remembered her mother's gentle voice, the warmth of her family, the smell of fresh bread from the kitchen back home. These memories were distant, almost painful, but they gave her a small spark of strength. She knew she had to survive whatever came next. Her survival depended not just on her courage, but on the hope that someone out there might care about her. The auctioneer's voice rang out, loud and commanding, cutting through the whispers and quiet murmurs. He began listing names, ages, and details about the girls who had already been sold. Each time a hammer fell, another girl disappeared from the room, leaving only silence behind, like a space emptied of life. May felt the tension tighten around her chest. She had heard stories of what could happen to girls like her. Some were sent to work in farms, others to houses as servants, and some never returned to their families. Her mind raced with fear, imagining a life where she might be alone, working endlessly and never finding a place to call home. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to show weakness in a room full of strangers who did not know her story. Among the crowd, May noticed families who had come to bid, but only a few seemed to show any real emotion. Most were calculating, thinking about what the girl could do, how she might help with chores, or even how she might be an addition to their household for social appearance. There were men who laughed loudly, competing to see who could offer the highest bid, and women who whispered advice to their husbands. But no one knelt down to speak to May. No one reached out to comfort her. Breaths. She felt small, invisible, and yet she also felt a flicker of determination. She did not know how she would get through this, but she had survived worse things before, and she would survive this too. Her past had taught her resilience, and she held onto that inner strength like a lifeline. The last moment approached, and all eyes turned to May. The auctioneer raised his hand, asking for the final bids. She could hear the whispering, the scribbling of notes, the clatter of coins, and the heavy breathing of those deciding her fate. May's small heart pounded as she scanned the room, hoping, praying even, that someone would understand the fear and loneliness she carried. She thought of her life before this moment, of the streets she had walked, the people she had known, and the love she had lost. Those memories were her anchors, giving her the courage to face the unknown.
As the auctioneer called out, her stomach twisted with anxiety.
Breaths. She realized that her life could change in a single moment, depending entirely on the choices of strangers. Yet, despite the fear, a quiet hope remained, a hope that maybe, just maybe, someone kind-hearted would step forward. And then she noticed a man standing quietly at the back, observing everything. He did not shout, he did not compete aggressively, and he did not seem interested in the girl as an object. He simply watched, and in his eyes May felt something she had not felt in a long time. The possibility of safety, the hint of compassion, the chance that someone might see her as more than a commodity. His presence did not erase the fear in her chest, but it softened it, giving her a tiny light to cling to. For the first time since arriving in this strange town, she dared to imagine a life where she might belong somewhere, with someone who cared about her well-being. That single thought gave her the courage to breathe, to sit tall, and to prepare herself for whatever was about to happen next. It was a small, fragile hope, but it was enough to carry her through the final moments of the auction. Thomas, the widower rancher, had lived alone for many years on the outskirts of Red Willow. His ranch was wide and open, stretching over rolling hills and fenced pastures where cattle grazed under the sun. The house, a sturdy wooden structure with a creaking porch, was quiet and still. Years ago his wife had fallen ill, and shortly after their only child had passed away. The grief had left a deep mark on Thomas. He went through each day with routine and hard work, tending the land and animals, but the emptiness inside was constant, state. The ranch was well maintained, but there was no laughter, no warmth, no voices echoing through the rooms. Thomas had grown used to solitude, yet he sometimes felt that something was missing, something he could not name. He had heard about the auction in town while buying supplies at the general store. The news was strange and troubling, but also impossible to ignore. A line of people had gathered to bid on young Chinese girls, and only one remained. Thomas did not know much about her, only that she was alone, timid, and frightened. Something stirred within him, a feeling he had not felt for a long time, a sense of responsibility, perhaps even compassion. He thought of his own loss, of the daughter he would never hold again, and he wondered if this girl, too, deserved a chance at a life filled with care rather than fear. That morning, as Thomas walked along the dusty street toward the auction house, he noticed the way people looked at him. The townsfolk had seen him around before, known as a quiet man, strong in body but gentle in nature. Yet today their eyes were curious, even skeptical. Some whispered about the audacity of buying a child who had no family, while others wondered if he had a hidden motive. Thomas paid little attention. His mind was focused only on one thing, giving the girl a chance at safety and a home. He did not expect recognition or gratitude. He only hoped to do the right thing. As he entered the auction house, the room seemed hotter, louder, and more crowded than he had imagined. The auctioneer was calling out bids rapidly, and the air was thick with tension. Thomas moved quietly to the back, observing May, the last girl remaining. She was small and delicate, with dark, wary eyes that seemed to measure everyone in the room. She clutched her little bundle close, as if it were a shield. The other bidders shouted numbers, argued, and waved their hands, but Thomas did not speak. He did not raise his voice or compete aggressively. Instead, he studied the girl, noticing the tremble in her hands, the nervous shifting of her feet, and the way her eyes darted around the room. In that moment, he understood her fear, and he felt a deep, protective instinct awaken inside him. For a long moment, Thomas watched silently. Memories of his own child, of soft laughter, and tiny hands in his, came rushing back. He remembered bedtime stories, morning routines, the simple joy of sharing meals together. His heart ached for what he had lost, and suddenly he knew that he could not let this girl face a life of uncertainty or hardship alone. Thomas was not a wealthy man, and the work on his ranch was hard. But he had a home, food, and safety to offer. That was more than many others could give, and it was enough to change the course of her life. He straightened his back, took a deep breath, and made a decision he knew would alter both their lives forever.
"I'll take her," he said quietly, his voice calm but firm.
The room went silent. The auctioneer blinked in surprise, a pause hanging in the air as everyone processed the statement. A few men whispered to each other, questioning why a single man, a widower with no family, would claim a young girl at auction.
Others frowned, wondering if Thomas had some hidden motive.
But Thomas did not waver. He simply repeated, "I'll take her. She will come to my ranch." The words felt heavier than any hammer or bid. In that instant, the decision was made, and the future of May, the last girl at the auction, began to take shape.
May, unsure of what she was hearing, looked up at Thomas.
Around, his eyes were kind, steady, and calm, a stark contrast to the shouting, eager faces around her. She felt a flicker of hope, but it was fragile, easily broken by disappointment or fear. She had learned to keep her expectations low, to brace herself for rejection, and to expect the worst. Yet something about Thomas felt different. He did not see her as a possession or a tool. He seemed to see her as a person, someone deserving of care and protection. Best. For the first time in many weeks, May allowed herself a small breath of hope, a quiet trust that perhaps this man could offer her safety and a new life. The auctioneer nodded, confirming Thomas's claim. The hammer fell, marking the end of the sale. The people in the room shifted, some muttering disapproval, others curious about what this quiet rancher intended to do. Thomas stepped forward gently, holding out his hand. "Come with me," he said softly. May hesitated for a moment, the weight of uncertainty heavy on her small shoulders. Then, slowly, she rose, clutching her bundle, and followed Thomas out of the auction house. The noise, the shouting, the chaos of the room faded behind her. Outside, the sun shone brightly, and the wind carried the scent of open fields, animals, and distant mountains. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, May felt that she was stepping into a life that could be safe, a life where she might belong. The journey to the ranch was quiet, with Thomas leading the way along dusty roads and winding trails. May walked carefully beside him, her small hands holding tightly to her bundle. She asked few questions, unsure of what to say, but Thomas answered what he could, telling her about the ranch, the animals, and the work she might help with. His voice was steady and calm, never rushing, never commanding. May listened intently, absorbing every detail, imagining what her new life could be like. But she thought of past hardships, of fear and loneliness, and slowly the tension in her chest began to ease. Though the road ahead would not be easy, she felt a sense of reassurance in Thomas's presence, a quiet certainty that she was no longer alone. Upon reaching the ranch, May's eyes widened at the sight of open pastures, grazing cattle, and sturdy wooden fences. The house stood at the center, strong and welcoming, with smoke curling gently from the chimney. Thomas showed her the different areas, where she would sleep, where meals were prepared, and where the animals were kept. He explained patiently and kindly that life on a ranch required hard work, but that she would have food, safety, and a home. May listened, nodding quietly, and felt a strange mix of relief, curiosity, and cautious optimism. For the first time in her young life, she could imagine a place where she was wanted, where she belonged, and where she could begin to heal from past losses. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Thomas and May sat together on the porch. The animals had been fed, the chores were done, and the quiet of the ranch settled around them. Thomas offered her a warm meal and a soft bed, small gestures that spoke volumes about care and protection. May hesitated at first, unsure of how to respond to kindness she had not known in years. But slowly, as she ate and listened to Thomas's gentle voice telling stories about the ranch, about the seasons, and about life, she began to relax. For the first time since being taken from her home, she felt the beginnings of trust, a fragile yet powerful sense that she was safe and valued. That night, as May lay in the small bed in her new room, she thought about the auction, the shouting, and the strange, frightening world she had left behind. Thus, she thought about Thomas, the quiet man who had offered her a chance at a new life. And for the first time, she allowed herself to feel hope. She knew the road ahead would be filled with challenges, that adapting to ranch life would be difficult, and that she had much to learn. But for now, in the stillness of the night, she allowed herself to believe that life could be different, that she could be cared for, and that perhaps, after so many losses, she might finally find a place to belong. Life on the ranch was very different from anything May had ever known. The wide open spaces, the smell of hay and animals, and the constant work were all overwhelming at first. Each morning, Thomas would wake early, long before the sun rose, to check on the cattle, repair fences, and feed the animals. May would follow him, still nervous, still unsure of her place in this new world. Her hands, small and delicate, had never handled tools or ropes, and her body ached from the long walks and chores. At first it seemed impossible, and she often wanted to turn back, to escape the hard work and the unfamiliar surroundings. But Thomas never scolded or forced her. Instead, he guided her with patience, showing her each task step by step, explaining why it mattered, and allowing her to learn at her own pace, breath's breath. The first weeks were full of small victories and quiet frustrations. May learned how to milk cows, gather eggs, and carry buckets of water without spilling. She learned to recognize the sounds of animals, the lowing of cattle, the clucking of chickens, the soft neigh of horses in the distance. Each day she grew stronger, her muscles adjusting to the hard work, her confidence slowly returning. Thomas would often walk beside her, offering advice or encouragement, but never rushing her. He understood that she had been through unimaginable loss, and he wanted her to feel safe, to regain trust in the world and in people.
In turn, began to feel a sense of pride. She had thought herself weak and fragile, but she was learning that she could contribute, that she could do things she had never imagined possible.
Evenings on the ranch were quieter, but they brought a new kind of challenge. Thomas had a way of encouraging conversation without pressure, telling May about the land, about the cattle, about the cycles of planting and harvesting. Slowly, May began to share small stories of her past, memories of her family, and experiences that had shaped her. She did not speak of everything at once, and Thomas did not ask too many questions. He listened patiently, offering comfort when she mentioned painful memories and celebrating small triumphs when she recalled happier times. Through these conversations, a bond began to grow between them, not just of guardian and ward, but of two people who understood loneliness and loss. and who were learning to heal together. One day, while working in the barn, May accidentally dropped a heavy bucket, spilling water across the floor. She winced, expecting Thomas to scold her, but he simply smiled, shook his head, and said, "It's okay. Mistakes happen."
That's how we learn. The relief she felt in that moment was enormous. For years she had been punished or ignored, made to feel that any small mistake was unforgivable. Now, she realized that here, mistakes were just part of life, opportunities to improve, not reasons to feel shame. She began to experiment more boldly with her work, trying new tasks, learning to ride horses, and even helping to mend fences. With each success, her confidence grew, and with each failure, her resilience strengthened. Despite the growing comfort, challenges remained. The work was hard, the days long, and the nights sometimes lonely. May missed the small comforts of home, even as distant as they seemed now. She missed speaking her own language, hearing familiar sounds and feeling completely understood. Thomas noticed these moments of sadness and would often sit with her in silence, sharing stories of the land, telling her about his wife and child in gentle, careful ways, never pushing her to feel sorrow, but acknowledging the reality of their lives. In these moments, May began to understand that healing did not mean forgetting the past. It meant learning to live again, to find strength, and to carry hope even when memories hurt. The community in town began to take notice of May. Some of the neighbors were curious about the quiet girl who had come from the auction, while others whispered about the unusual kindness of Thomas. Children in the town watched from a distance, some shyly approaching, others hesitant. At first, May kept to herself, wary of strangers and unsure of how to interact. But slowly, she began to form small friendships, sharing stories, helping with small tasks, and learning to laugh again. Thomas encouraged her social connections, explaining that people in the community could be trusted if approached carefully. He taught her the importance of observation, kindness, and caution, preparing her to navigate a world that could be both generous and harsh. One afternoon, a severe storm hit the ranch. Dark clouds rolled in. Heavy winds blew across the fields, and rain began to pour in torrents. The cattle became restless, the horses panicked, and the fences creaked under the force of the wind. Thomas and May worked together, securing gates, bringing animals to shelter, and protecting the house from the storm. May's hands were raw from the labor, and her clothes were soaked, but she did not complain. The fear and chaos of the storm reminded her of past hardships, yet she also realized how much she had grown. She could face challenges, work alongside someone she trusted, and survive situations that would have once terrified her. Thomas watched her, pride evident in his eyes. He had chosen to take her in, and now he saw the transformation in her spirit and resilience. During quiet moments after the storm, May would sometimes sit on the porch, watching the rain drip from the roof, and reflect on her life. She thought about her family, about the auction, and about the strange kindness that had brought her here. For the first time, she began to feel that perhaps her life could be different, that she could create a future filled with hope, not just survival. Thomas joined her on those evenings, often in silence, allowing her to speak if she wished, or simply sharing the stillness. The silence was comfortable, filled with mutual understanding. Neither had all the answers, but together they were discovering that life could have moments of peace, even after great loss. May also began to notice subtle changes in Thomas. He was no longer the man solely defined by grief and routine. With her presence, he smiled more easily, spoke with gentleness he had not shown in years, and allowed himself to enjoy small pleasures, like the laughter of animals, the beauty of the sunset, or the taste of a meal shared in quiet contentment. The ranch, once a place of hard work and solitude, became a home filled with subtle warmth. Their bond deepened not through words alone, but through shared labor, shared meals, and the quiet understanding that each had rescued the other in some way. May's presence reminded Thomas of life's value, its small joys, and the importance of love and care. even if in unexpected forms. As months passed, May's skills on the ranch grew. She could ride horses with confidence, herd cattle, and even manage small projects on her own. She had learned patience, resilience, and the rewards of hard work, but more importantly, she had learned to trust, to hope, and to love the life that had been offered to her. Thomas, too, had changed. His grief was still present, but it was no longer all-consuming. He had someone to share his days with, someone whose laughter could fill the empty spaces of his home, someone whose growth reminded him that life could move forward even after tragedy. Yet life was not without difficulties. There were days when mistakes were made, when the animals were stubborn, or when supplies ran low. May sometimes felt frustration, fear, or homesickness, and Thomas knew that patience and understanding were required. He guided her gently, teaching problem-solving, careful planning, and the importance of perseverance. Slowly, May understood that challenges were not signs of failure but opportunities for learning, growth, and building strength. Together, they faced each challenge, side by side, learning from one another and forming a partnership built on trust, care, and mutual respect. By the end of the year, the ranch felt like a home. The bond between Thomas and May was strong, filled with mutual respect and unspoken understanding. They had faced storms, mastered chores, and shared quiet evenings. And through it all, they had found companionship and healing. May no longer felt like the timid, fearful girl at the auction. Instead, she was confident, capable, and beginning to imagine a future filled with hope. Thomas, once weighed down by grief and solitude, had found purpose and connection. Together, they had transformed not only the ranch but their own lives, proving that kindness, patience, and courage could create a place of safety, belonging, and love, even in the most unexpected circumstances. Life on the ranch had grown into a steady rhythm, but it was not without its challenges. Thomas and May had settled into a routine, yet the unpredictable nature of ranch life meant that difficult moments could arrive suddenly. One spring morning, Thomas noticed that one of the fences at the far end of the pasture had been damaged. The strong winds from the previous night had knocked down part of the wooden barrier, leaving the cattle exposed to the open fields. If the animals wandered, it could cause disaster for both the ranch and the neighboring farms. Thomas knew he had to act quickly, but he also realized that he could not manage everything alone. He turned to May, who had grown much stronger and more capable since arriving at the ranch. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the broken fence, but she did not hesitate. She trusted Thomas, and she trusted herself to do what needed to be done. Together, they gathered the tools and supplies needed for the repairs. May carried boards and nails, struggling at first with the weight, but Thomas encouraged her, guiding her hands and showing her the proper way to secure the planks. The work was exhausting. The sun beat down on their backs, the soil under their feet was uneven, and the cattle occasionally wandered too close, requiring careful attention. Sweat ran down May's face, and her muscles ached, but she did not complain. She knew the importance of the work, and more than that, she knew that Thomas was counting on her. His quiet confidence in her abilities gave her courage, and with each hammer strike, each board nailed in place, she felt a growing sense of accomplishment. As they worked, Thomas spoke to May about resilience and responsibility. "Life will throw challenges at us," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sometimes it will feel impossible, but the important thing is to keep going, to do your best, and to learn from each experience. That is how we grow stronger." May listened carefully, absorbing every word. She understood that these lessons were more than about ranch work. They were lessons for life itself. Each obstacle they faced together was teaching her how to trust herself, how to make decisions, and how to persevere even when fear and doubt threatened to take over. The fence repair took hours, but by the late afternoon it was complete. The cattle were safely contained, the ranch secured, and both Thomas and May were exhausted but satisfied. May stood back and admired their work. The fence looked strong and steady, a symbol of their teamwork and determination. Thomas smiled at her, pride shining in his eyes. "You did well," he said simply. May felt a warmth in her chest at the words. She had begun to realize that praise was not just about recognition. It was about encouragement, about knowing that her efforts mattered and that she could make a difference. Yet life on the ranch was not only about work. There were moments of reflection, of quiet conversations, and of shared stories that brought them closer together. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Thomas and May sat on the porch with mugs of warm tea. May spoke of her memories from her childhood, of the streets she had known, and of the family she had lost. Breaths. Thomas listened with gentle attention, never pushing, never interrupting. He understood that healing was a process, and that patience was more valuable than words. Breath. He shared his own memories as well, carefully recounting the life he had lost and the lessons he had learned along the way. In those quiet moments they discovered a deeper bond, not just of guardian and child, but of two people who had endured loss and were learning to live again. However, the past was never far behind. One day a group of travelers arrived at the town, speaking of raids and dangers in nearby areas. Stories of lost homes, stolen livestock, and families torn apart reminded May of the fear she had experienced before Thomas had rescued her.
Anxiety crept back into her chest, making her question whether she was truly safe.
Thomas noticed the change in her demeanor and took the time to reassure her. He explained that while danger could never be completely avoided, preparation, caution, and care could protect them. He reminded her of the skills she had learned on the ranch, the ability to face challenges, to stay calm under pressure, and to think ahead. These lessons, he said, were not just for ranch life, but for any situation she might encounter in the future. As spring turned to summer, the ranch faced another challenge. A neighboring rancher accused Thomas of letting some cattle stray onto his land. The dispute was tense, and Thomas knew he had to handle it carefully to prevent conflict. May watched as he calmly approached the other rancher, speaking with patience and honesty. She realized that courage was not always about strength or force. It was also about fairness, calmness, and respect. Thomas involved her in small ways, asking her opinion on minor decisions and showing her how to remain composed in difficult situations. May felt proud, understanding that she was not just learning farm work, but also the values of integrity, responsibility, and courage. Through all these challenges, May continued to grow. She had once been timid and uncertain, fearful of strangers and the unknown. Now she faced each day with a quiet confidence, ready to contribute, to learn, and to help. Thomas noticed the changes in her demeanor, the way she handled chores, the way she approached animals, and the thoughtful way she considered decisions. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that he had provided not just shelter but guidance, care, and the space for her to grow. Together, they were creating a life built on trust, shared responsibility, and mutual respect. Yet perhaps the most important moments were the small ones, the moments that revealed the humanity and connection between them. One evening, May was teaching a young calf to follow her along the pasture. The animal stumbled, and May instinctively reached out, steadying it with gentle hands. Thomas watched from a distance, smiling to himself. He saw not only the skill she had developed, but the empathy and care she now carried in her heart. This was what mattered most to him, the way she was learning to trust, to nurture, and to face the world with courage. It was a reflection of the life they had built together, one not defined by past hardships, but by resilience, compassion, and hope.
Despite the growing harmony, there were still moments of doubt.
May sometimes wondered if she truly belonged, if she could ever fully leave the memories of her past behind. Thomas, sensing these thoughts, encouraged her gently.
"You belong here," he said. "Not because you owe anyone, not because of what happened before, but because you have worked, learned, and become part of this life.
Home is not just a place. It's where we are valued, where we are safe, and where we are loved.
May absorbed his words, feeling them settle into her heart.
She realized that belonging was not about perfection or certainty, but about connection, trust, and care. As the seasons changed, Thomas and May faced smaller challenges: harsh weather, occasional illnesses among the animals, and the constant demands of ranch life. Each time they approached the problems together, combining their knowledge, strength, and patience. May's confidence grew with each success, and Thomas's pride grew alongside her. Together they proved that even after loss, even after hardship, life could be rebuilt with care, courage, and determination.
By the end of part 4, the story reached a critical moment of reflection.
May was no longer the frightened girl at the auction, and Thomas was no longer the lonely widower consumed by grief. Both had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. They had faced storms, disputes, and fears, learning important lessons about responsibility, courage, and the power of human kindness. Their bond had deepened into something that went beyond mere necessity. It was built on trust, mutual respect, and the shared experience of surviving hardship. Together they had created a home and a life filled with hope, proving that even in the most difficult circumstances, people could find strength, healing, and a sense of belonging. The years passed on the ranch quietly but meaningfully. May, once a timid girl at an auction, had grown into a confident, capable young woman. She moved through the pastures with ease, her hands strong from years of work, her mind sharp from all the lessons Thomas had patiently taught her. The animals responded to her calmly, sensing the care and respect she gave them. She no longer flinched at loud noises or sudden movements, and her dark eyes carried a quiet determination and wisdom far beyond her years. The girl who had once been fearful, uncertain, and alone now had a presence that inspired respect from neighbors and admiration from those who visited the ranch. Thomas watched her progress with a quiet pride that never waned. He had once been consumed by grief, a man whose life had been empty and silent. Now the ranch was full, not just of animals and the rhythm of work, but of life and laughter. May's presence had brought joy back into his days. He noticed the small things, the way she hummed softly while feeding the chickens, the careful attention she gave to a sick calf, the way she remembered details about the fields and fences. These daily actions reminded him that life could be beautiful again, even after pain. They had both changed, shaped by the past, but no longer bound by it, creating a future that was stronger because of the hardships they had endured. Life in the town had changed as well. People who had once whispered about the auction now looked at May with admiration. They saw her growth, her confidence, and her kindness. But his children were drawn to her, watching as she taught them how to care for animals, plant gardens, and respect the land. Adults spoke of her maturity and calmness, noting the positive influence she had on the community. May had become more than just the girl rescued from the auction. She had become a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of compassion. Thomas, too, had earned respect, not only for his hard work and honesty, but for the courage and kindness he had shown by giving her a chance at life. Together they had transformed not only the ranch, but the perception of their small town, showing that true care and humanity could leave a lasting mark. Despite the peace they had built, challenges continued to test them. One summer, a severe drought struck the region. The grass dried, the cattle grew restless, and the water supply became scarce. The ranch required careful management to survive the season. May worked tirelessly alongside Thomas, measuring water, rationing feed, and tending to the livestock with precision and patience. She had learned to make decisions calmly under pressure, balancing immediate needs with long-term consequences. Thomas watched her, impressed by her growth and maturity. He realized that the skills she had acquired were not just about ranch work, they were lessons for life. Lessons about responsibility,
courage and perseverance.
Through this drought, May proved her ability to face adversity, and Thomas was reminded that the girl he had rescued was now a strong, independent young woman capable of remarkable judgment.
There were quieter, tender moments too, moments that reminded them both of how far they had come.
One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold over the hills, Thomas and May sat on the porch drinking tea.
May reflected on the journey from the auction house to the present, her heart full of gratitude and awe at the life she now lived. She thought of the fear, loneliness, and uncertainty she had once carried, and realized how much courage it had taken to survive those early days. Thomas spoke gently, reminding her of the small steps that had brought them here, the daily chores, the careful guidance, and the trust they had built together. Brask, their bond, forged through shared struggle and understanding, was deeper than either could have imagined, and in that quiet evening, they both felt a profound sense of contentment and connection.
As the years continued, May began to take more initiative on the ranch.
Pastures, improve the fences, and care for the animals sufficiently. She even began helping neighbors with their livestock, sharing her knowledge and skills. Her confidence and competence were recognized by all, and she earned a reputation as someone reliable, kind, and wise beyond her years. Thomas felt a quiet pride in watching her lead and guide others. He had given her a chance at life, but in turn she had brought vitality, wisdom, and hope to the ranch, the town, and his own life. The once lonely rancher and the frightened girl had built something remarkable together: a home, a community, and a life of purpose. Inspiration. Despite the successes, life reminded them that growth and healing were ongoing. May sometimes still thought of her lost family, moments of sadness quietly touching her heart. She would share her feelings with Thomas, who listened with patience and compassion, offering comfort and wisdom. He taught her that remembering the past was not a sign of weakness, but a way to honor those who had shaped her life. Together, they learned to balance memory and present joy, sorrow, and hope, understanding that life was a tapestry woven with both hardships and blessings. Through these shared experiences, their connection grew stronger, founded not just on circumstance but on love, trust, and mutual respect. By now, the ranch had become a place of life, laughter, and growth. May's presence brought joy not only to Thomas but also to the animals, the land, and the community. Children learned from her patience. Neighbors admired her strength, and travelers passing through often commented on the warmth and care evident in the ranch. Thomas and May had created more than a home. They had created a sanctuary, a living example of resilience, kindness, and the human capacity to recover and thrive after loss. The ranch itself seemed to reflect this transformation. Fences sturdy and well-maintained, animals healthy and happy, and the fields flourishing under their careful guidance. In the quiet moments of the evenings, Thomas sometimes reflected on the choices he had made years earlier. Offering his name at the auction had seemed like a small act, yet it had changed the course of 2 lives. May had transformed from a scared, timid girl into a confident, capable young woman. Thomas had transformed from a lonely, grieving widower into a man with purpose, connection, and hope. Their lives were richer, fuller, and more meaningful because of the bond they had formed. He understood now that true family was not always born of blood, but of care, trust, and shared experiences. The ultimate test of their bond came one autumn when a fire broke out near the edge of the pasture. Flames spread quickly through dry grass, threatening the fields and livestock. Thomas and May worked together with urgency, moving animals to safety, dousing small flames, and securing the property. The fire was dangerous, exhausting, and frightening. Yet they faced it side by side, their actions perfectly synchronized from years of working together. By nightfall, the fire was contained and the ranch was safe, though charred patches marked the land as a reminder of the challenge they had faced. May's courage and quick thinking had been crucial, and Thomas could not have been prouder. They had survived together, grown stronger together, and proven that even in moments of crisis, their partnership and trust could overcome any danger.
As the years rolled on, the ranch flourished. The bond between Thomas and May deepened, and the girl who had once been sold at auction finally found a place she could call home. She had grown not only in skill but in wisdom and empathy, but she understood the importance of kindness, hard work, and perseverance, and she embodied those values in every action she took. Thomas, too, had grown. He had learned to open his heart again, to trust, and to love in a way that honored both the past and the present. Together they had transformed what could have been a tragic story into one of hope, resilience, and triumph. In the end, the auction that had once seemed like a moment of despair became a distant memory, overshadowed by life, love, and accomplishment. May was no longer the lonely girl left behind. She was a young woman with purpose, home, and family. Thomas was no longer a widower consumed by grief. He was a mentor, guardian, and friend whose life had been renewed by the very act of kindness he had offered years before. The ranch stood as a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and resilience. It showed that even after tragedy, people could find hope, rebuild, and create a life filled with love, respect, and connection. May often reflected on her journey, from the auction house, where fear and uncertainty had dominated her life, to the safety and warmth of the ranch. She understood that her past had shaped her, but it did not define her. Compassion and guidance and belonging in a place she had never expected to call home. Thomas had provided her with more than safety. He had given her confidence, love, and the chance to flourish. Together they had shown that life could be transformed by small acts of courage, kindness, and faith in one another. Years later, travelers passing through Red Willow would hear the story of the girl who had been sold at auction and the widower who had offered his name. They would see the thriving ranch, the well-cared-for animals, and the young woman who had grown into a remarkable person. They would understand that the story was not just about survival, but about the extraordinary power of compassion, courage, and the human spirit. May and Thomas had taken a moment of despair and turned it into a lifetime of hope, proving that even the darkest beginnings could lead to light, growth, and enduring happiness.